You know, our lives are sometimes not always as they appear today, and we all have past, and that's what I'd like to share with you today, a little bit about my past. And when I was very, very young, I was raised in a Christian home. My father and my mother were Baptist, and we went to church every Sunday night, every Wednesday night, and I was my daddy's little girl. We spent lots of time together. But as time went on in the church, my mom and dad, my mom was a youth leader, my dad was a deacon, but I got bored with church, and I thought that church was something that I didn't need anymore. So I began to drift away from church and rebel, and decided that I wanted to spend more of my time with other friends in other places. And I found lots of friends that I thought were really good friends at that time. And we began to share cigarettes and alcohol and tobacco. And I didn't want anything else to do with church. And I spent most of my time driving around, smoking the pot, drinking the alcohol. But then I was very, very young then. I was still, 10 years old. My friends were older, and we drove around and did things that teenagers would do, but yet I was very, very young. During this time, I had people that would fondle me when I didn't, in places I didn't want to be touched, and as time went on and they continued to fondle me, I began to look at sex or with this particular thing as not being so bad, and I continued with my drugs and my alcohol, and the fondling of myself continued to go on, and my whole outlook began to change. It wasn't long that I had found a friend who was much older than me, and we were smoking pot together, and then one night things got out of hand, and the next thing I know, we were having sex. And I was very young. I was 12 years old, and it wasn't very long down the road after that I found out that I was pregnant, and I had to have an abortion. I couldn't very well raise a child at this age of my own. And in this time, I'm still doing the drugs and the alcohol and smoking the cigarettes, and my life's just getting deeper and deeper. And of course, I met another fellow who, this fellow, I loved him. He was going to be my mate for life. And my father, he didn't really understand why I wanted to get married. And he asked me, "Are you pregnant?" Again. And I said, yes, I was pregnant. And we blowed a bulb. Okay. Yes. When I was around 16 years old, I had gone to my father, and I had met a man, and I thought I was in love, and we were going to spend our life together. And my parents knew that this fellow wasn't going to be what I really needed in my life, but of course I wouldn't listen. And my parents kept praying for me the whole time. They prayed and they prayed. But I had my own choices and my own will that I would follow. And so I went to my father and I said I was getting married, and my father said, "Are you pregnant?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, you don't have to marry just because you're pregnant. You don't have to get married." "Oh, but I love him, I love him." Well, my mother wouldn't go to the wedding, and my father, he attended the wedding. He had to sign the papers so that I could get married. And then my life began to really start down a steeper incline of destruction. I began to get legal drugs. After I had my first child, which was a boy, I began to use excuses like menstrual cramps or whatever reason I could to go to the doctor and get medication. So it wasn't long that I became a legal drug addict, and I would get what I needed from the doctor would give it to me, and then as time went on, being a legal drug addict, I would call other doctors and get prescriptions from them and pretend like I was their patient and that they could give me my prescription through the pharmacy, and I would get prescriptions that way. Well, then You know, things always get tiring. Humans cannot stand to stay the same. So I began to do street drugs as well. And we would, every weekend, every day would be getting more and more drugs to satisfy our needs. And my husband was a drug addict, I was a drug addict, and my son was being raised in this environment. As time went on, I decided that I needed a different life. So I had met a fellow on a motorcycle, and he had a Harley Davidson, and so I left my husband. And I took my children to my parents' house, and I abandoned them. I left them. And I took off with this man on this motorcycle, and we traveled around the country from coast to coast. No jobs, no money, just kind of vagabond about panhandling money, going to Walmart or Kmart or shopping stores and stealing items and then returning them for the money so that we would have money. But the panhandling was the biggest thing that I used to supply our drug addictions, and the alcohol and the pot. But once we reached California, there was several things in my life that changed then too. The guy I was with, he wasn't my husband, he was just a person that I was with on this motorcycle. We got to Costa Mesa, California, and he got arrested. And the police had pulled us over, found a sawed-off shotgun in our bedroll, and so they took him to jail. And there I stood on the corner in Costa Mesa, California, and I knew nobody. And I had no transportation, I had no money. So the only thing I could think to do was to go to the police station, where I threw out my bedroll in front of the police station there, and I laid down. I had nowhere to go. And it wasn't long after I was laying there asleep that I felt someone shoving on my shoulder, and it was a girl, and she wanted me to go to the Alcohol Anonymous class, which was AAA. I had no idea what AAA was. She told me they had donuts and coffee. So I was interested because I was hungry. And when I went there and I seen all the people standing there, and they would stand up and say, "Hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm an alcoholic." I thought, these people, they really got some problems, but not recognizing that I had more severe problems. I attended the meeting there, and she put me up in her boyfriend's house for a few days, and then I decided I couldn't stay there. I needed to get going. I was going to cause them problems. So then I went to the Salvation Army, and here is when I really seen what street people lived like. And yet I still displaced them from me. I wasn't the street person, they were the street person. They had the problems. I didn't have the problems. And I was in denial that I was having some severe problems. I denied it. Yet each day I lived to get drugs, alcohol, smoke pot, smoke cigarettes, and I would panhandle to get this every day. Well, my boyfriend got out of jail, and we traveled the country some more, and from time to time I would call my parents collect and tell them, how I was doing and ask about my children, and they would send me pictures of my children and how they were growing up, and I would look at the pictures and I would want to see my kids, but yet I knew something else held on to me, and it was the drugs and the alcohol, and I couldn't look beyond that. They were safe. They were with my mom and dad. That's all I could think. There was times I would think about God, because I knew God. But see, I was raised a Baptist, and I was raised once saved, always saved. And that's not true. Now I know that's not true, but then I thought, I know God, I've been saved, and I'm going to go to heaven. But you're not going to go to heaven when you're not living to God's obedience. What do you want you to do? And so therefore we're not always saved. But I didn't think about these things then. All I had on my mind was the drugs. And so the friend and I, we were in Detroit, Michigan, and we were in an accident. The motorcycle, we hit a car broadside, and I was in the hospital. They said I had a bruised pelvic bone. And I didn't have any insurance, and as badly as I was hurting, I thought, no, I think I'm broke, and they just won't let me get any treatment because I don't have any insurance. So they sent me home to where we was living. It was not my home, it was another person's home. I didn't have homes. I didn't know what home was, not when I left home. And I stayed there till I recuperated, was able to get the motorcycle fixed through panhandling, going out and asking people for spare change. Got the motorcycle fixed. But see, my life kept getting deeper and deeper. Again, now I'm getting the drugs from the doctor, and I'm getting the street drugs. And we take off from that area, and we head to Houston, Texas, Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas. We get down there, and I had always heard, don't ever try heroin, because if you ever try heroin, you will never be able to stop it. I didn't believe it. And so I had an opportunity to just try some heroin. And I did. And I was a slave to the heroin for many years. Every morning I got up, every morning it was to get enough money to get the drugs. My husband, or the guy that I was with on the motorcycle, I called him my husband, we lived together. But you know, God makes a marriage, and we don't make marriages by living with people. You know, there's vows and there's commitments. So he was a person I was just living with. But each morning we would get up. Between the two of us, we had a $500 a day habit. So every morning it was bright and early to get up, go out, and start working the parking lots for spare change and telling people lies to get money so that we could get what we needed just to not be sick. And then after that, you was able to feel the high from the drug. But see, heroin is a physical addicting drug. And when you don't have it, you get sick, your bones hurt, your arms hurt, your muscles hurt. And you have to have it. It's not something you can say, oh, I don't think I'll do that today. No, you have to have it because it makes your body hurt so bad to not have it. So that was my beginning of my day, and it continued all day long. That way we could go on and get the enjoyment out of it, not just take the sick away. This went on for years and years. And one day I was sitting with a girl, and we were in a house that everybody there did drugs. And I was talking to Frida, and she looked at me and she said, Teresa, you're way out there and you don't belong there. Now I couldn't figure out why she was telling me I was way out there, and she's sitting there shooting the heroin, doing the heroin just like me, but I'm way out there. But you know, it's what she said that day that made me start thinking about my life. God gave me a little glimpse of life that day, and I saw it. And I seen that my life was in a bad way. And I began to think, where's my children? Where's my family? What's going to happen to me down the road? Where am I going to be in a year from now? And as I thought about this, I knew that I had to get off the drugs. But it's not something you can just stop. What was I going to do? So I went to a methadone clinic, a clinic where the government actually helps drug addicts to get off of the drugs that they're on. And here, when I went into this drug addiction clinic, I seen that it wasn't just people like me that had drug addictions, you know, nobodies. It was lawyers and doctors, all were having problems with these drugs, whether it was, you know, a prescription drug or heroin off the street. There are lots of drug addicts, but they are people that can help. And this drug clinic, they brought me in. They started me out on a methadone dose, and I began my rehabilitation. I wasn't an inpatient, I was an outpatient. I went there daily, I received counseling, and they helped me. During my time at the rehabilitation clinic, I would call my folks, and I wanted to tell them that I was going to change. And as I would call, they began to not accept my collect phone calls. And I would keep calling, and I wanted to tell them I was going to change, and I just knew that you know, they was going to believe me, and I needed to tell them that I was going to change. Because see, in the past I had called them several times and said that I was going to change. There was times my father, in these 25 years, that he would send me plane tickets to fly home because I said I was going to change and my life was going to change, and it wouldn't. And I would go right back to doing the same thing again. But this particular time in the rehabilitation center, I called my mom, and I heard her on the other end. She said, "No, we will not accept a collect phone call." And my heart broke. I wanted desperately to tell them that I was going to change, that my life was changing. So I kept calling, and no, we won't accept charges. They thought it was over for me. You know, the last time I had seen my mom, she said that she would see me come home in a pine box, and I didn't want to go home that way. That's why I was wanting to change, and this time I was going to change. So I continued in the methadone clinic, and I continued to call. And one day, I rang the phone, and the operator said, "You have a collect call?" And my mom said, "Yes, I'll accept that collect call." And when she answered the phone, I said, "Mom, it's me. I'm going to change." "Yes, I'm in rehabilitation now, and I'm going to change my life. I'm on the methadone, and I'm going to get off of the drugs." And she, you know, I thought she would believe me. And you know, she did that day. She said, "Oh, praise the Lord. And my prayers has been answered." And we cried, and we shared on the phone, and I hung up the phone. And I continued in the rehabilitation, and my life was beginning to change. One day I went into the rehabilitation clinic, and the lady there, she said, "You need to pay for your counseling today." And I said, "I didn't have any counseling." She said, "You need still to pay for your counseling." I said, "I didn't have any counseling. I'm not paying." So I refused to pay for the counseling, so they refused my medication for the day. I was at 5 milligrams, and that's not very low. But they didn't think that I was going to make it. And I said, "I will not be back. If I've got to pay for something that I didn't have, I won't be back." And they said, "You won't make it." And I decided that that day that was it. I wasn't going to go back, and I stopped the methadone. And I decided that my life would just be a big turnaround. As I began to go through the withdrawals from the methadone, I was scared. I was down to 85 pounds. My eyes sunk back in my head. My body functions did not happen. You know, methadone is as much addicting as the heroin is. I had body aches. My mind seemed like to be dead. I couldn't think, I couldn't say my name, I couldn't count money. And I didn't know what I was going to be in the end of this, you know, how normal I would be when it was over. So I just kept on. I was determined, and I kept with it. And after a couple, 2 or 3 weeks, I began to feel better. I didn't look very good, but I started feeling lots better. And I decided that I would go back to Illinois, to where my parents lived. And the fellow that I was riding with on the motorcycle and that I spent all this time with, not my husband, just my live-in, the guy I lived with, he had gone to the grocery store, and so I decided that I'd throw everything in the car and I would just leave. And while he was gone, I threw everything in the car and I took off for Illinois from Dallas, Fort Worth. I didn't get but about 20 miles outside of Dallas, and I had a flat tire. I know that it was Satan. He was trying to take me back into that life. He didn't want to let me go out of that life. But there was some kind people there at the station. They helped me change my tire, and again, I got on my way. I got back to Illinois at my parents' house, and oh, my mom and dad were so joyed to see me, but I wasn't very much like the person they had seen before. I was very skinny and very, very wiry, not very intelligent at that point. But I was going to get better. But I told my mom, I said, "I'm very tired. I got to get some sleep." She said, "Go on upstairs." So I went upstairs to lay down, and there in the room, I slept for a few hours. My mom came out. She said, "Come down. I need for you to come and see something." I thought, what is going on? I went downstairs and I had 4 flat tires. All my tires were flat on my car. And my mom said, "The Lord has brought you here on a wing and a prayer." And that He did. Well, my life continued to be on the uphill climb now, going into the normal life. I got a little job doing some things, and my mind started, coming back, and my hand-eye coordination was getting better, and I was putting on a little weight, and I was with my children, and they were so happy to see me when they come running to me, and they had grown up so much since the last time I'd seen them. They were babies when I left, and now they're young, they're older children. And it was hard for me to relate to them because I hadn't been there the times as they grew up. But we all had sharing the love for each other, and we continued to learn about each other and learn how life would, be together now. And it wasn't long that I got a letter from my husband that I married back when my son's father. And we weren't divorced. All this time I thought we had gotten a divorce, and we weren't divorced. And you know what it did? It made I was panicking. I went to the bar. And there at the bar, I said, give me, I need something to drink. I need to erase reality. I'm married. I'm still married to the man that I don't need to be married to. See, he was abusive to me. He beat on me, and he was mean to me when we was doing all those drugs, but I was still married to him. And I didn't know how to handle this because reality was something I had ran from all my life. I ran from reality. I didn't know how to deal with problems. So I went to the alcohol and I began to drink that night, and I met another new fellow in my life. And he was going to help me. He was going to help me change my life. And I began, as time went, to live with him, with my 2 sons. We lived there, and we drank. From morning to night, we drank. We were at the bar. The boys, my 2 boys, I had 2 children now, 2 children, and my boys they weren't part of the family. They stayed home by themselves. They ran around town, and they were with their friends at the neighbors or wherever most of the time. And we were at the bar drinking, and we drank, and I smoked cigarettes, and we drank, and I smoked cigarettes. And this was my life for about 10 years. But nearing the end of these 10 years, things again started changing. And there was times in this period that I would think, I can't handle this either. I've got to go back to the drugs. And one particular time I was hitchhiking on the interstate. I was headed back to Dallas to get back in the heroin because I couldn't handle reality. I needed something. I was looking and searching for something in my life to fill a void in my heart. And I continued to search for the wrong things. But I got on the interstate. I was hitchhiking back. I was headed back to the heroin, and this car pulls over, and it was a black couple. And they motioned for me to get in the car. I got into the car, and when the lady turned around, it looked like Frida. It looked like the drug addict in Dallas that had told me I was way out there and that I needed to change. It looked like Frida. I knew it wasn't Frida. It couldn't be Frida. And they asked me where I was going. I said, I was headed to Dallas-Fort Worth. What are you going there for? Well, I'm going out to Dallas-Fort Worth. You don't need to go to Dallas-Fort Worth, is what Frida said. And they turned the car around on Interstate 64. They took me back to my parents' house. I never told them where my parents lived. I never told them my parents' name. But they took me back to my parents' house. Now, today, I see that maybe my guardian angel's black, and maybe her name's Frida, but I really doubt it, but I do believe my guardian angel is black. They took me back to my parents, and I continued in this life with this fellow drinking all the time, and my children kind of being, they were apart from us, and this went on, and then one day, my children kept growing up. They grew up, and they were growing up in the alcohol atmosphere now, and they do little things in town that the police would come to the house, and this one particular time, the police came to the house, and my son had been arrested, and my older son, and that started his life of where he's at now, which is in prison. See, sin has consequences. And what we do, we have to pay for. God forgives us. But sin has consequences. And one of the consequences of my life and how I've raised my children was now my older son is in prison. It's his choice, the choices he made, just like the choices I made. So it's not always my fault. He had made those choices. But in Proverbs 22:6 it says, bring up a child in the way he shall go, and when he's old he will not depart from it. My parents did teach my children about God, and I pray, just like my mother prayed for me day and night, and I know there's power in prayer. I know that God changed my life, and that he can change my son's life. Both of my sons have children. Both of my sons are divorced. Both of my sons, they have very little contact with their children. But I know God can change their lives. They have forgiven me for the life that they were raised in. But it doesn't change it. It's still there. They love me as much as they know to love me, and I love them. They're my sons. But God has plans for all of us. And when we choose to look to him, he will make our life different. And in 1997, I began to look to God for guidance. I began to feel this void and this hole in my heart and my life with God. And it came through my now husband, who brought me to know the Lord, the truth of the Lord. Not just religion, a denomination, a belief, but to know God and to know how he loves us. He created us, and everything about us is special. And that love is what we need to understand. But my husband shared with me the truths of the Sabbath. He shared with me the truths of the church and the function of the church. He also helped me to get rid of the concepts that I had that weren't even true of the Bible, because we need to read the Bible for ourselves. Because when somebody tells you something, it doesn't mean it's fact. You need to read the Bible. But as he showed me all these things, I began to study the Adventist belief. And as I studied, and we shared, and he shared with me. He never told me I was wrong. He never told me I was bad. He would just share with me more and more about God. And the next thing I know, the alcohol disappeared. The cigarettes, they were a struggle. And yet today, because they're all over in the stores and everywhere you look, cigarettes are hard to get rid of. They're harder than heroin, I think, at times, because they're in my face. Marlboro, Winston, they're always there. But you know what? God is there. And when I grabbed the Bible in those weak times and I began to read, God gives me strength. He helps me in the many different ways that before I used drugs and I used alcohol. But as I studied all these truths, God started redoing my life. We can't change our life. We can't just say, I'm going to change my life. We can change our minds, but we can't change our hearts. When your heart is changed, your whole life is changed. And this is where it began with me. God began to change my heart. I began to soften. I wasn't the hard person who never cried. I wasn't the hard person who you couldn't get to me. And I began to feel tears gather in my eyes. And I would feel a softening about me that I didn't understand, but I liked it. And as I continued to look for God, who was right beside me, see, I had moved from God. God hadn't moved from me. I had walked away from him. And as I got closer and closer to God again, he began to fill this void in my life. And happiness and peace started flooding within my soul. And now then, today, I'm able to go to other people and share with them that you're never too bad. You're never too old. It's never too late. The ditch isn't too deep. You can dig your way out. You can do it with God. God is an awesome God, and he looks at each individual with a special purpose. Each one of us has been predestined by God to serve him, to be saved, not to be lost. And with that, we need to hold on to that and keep our eyes on Jesus, look to him, read his word, look to find the peace and comfort and the promises there that he has for us. because today I'm able now to share the gospel with many people all around the world. And God has been so good to me, to give me the opportunity to be back with my children, to be able to share with people that do have drug problems, whether they're street drugs or if they're prescription drugs. Just recognize you have a problem and take it to the Lord, and He will help you.
Okay. See?
Yeah. Ronnie did that earlier, and I said, I don't know what that means. You better not do that. Okay.
It's good.
Okay.
You want to end on that shot or end
Oh, yeah.
on a light shot?